Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you with us as always. We've got a special guest on board today. Can't wait to hear from. We're going to talk about the World Economic Forum and a lot of craziness that goes on there and how they use their tentacles in so many different ways to manipulate and make their agenda come to fruition. So I'm really excited about this because this is one of these topics that we talk about it a lot, but it's really fun to be able to do a deep dive, and sometimes we need to be able to do that. But before we get started, let's bring in my esteemed co-host, Mr. Lewis Herms. Lewis, how you doing today? I love that pink shirt, by the way. Meant to say that before we
Yes,
went on the air.
yes. Well, interesting enough with the pink shirt, my wife, who is my wardrobe consultant, said, "You do know that's a summer shirt, right?"
You know what, Lewis? It's
Okay,
always summer where we are, right?
it is. It's bright and sunny today.
That's
Actually,
right.
not. It's overcast and it will be raining soon. Yeah. So thank you for calling me esteemed. Appreciate that. I didn't know I've reached that level.
You've reached
So
that
now I am
pinnacle. Yep,
I
absolutely.
am esteemed.
You're
I
esteemed.
appreciate that. So this is going to be a great guest. I'll let you bring him on and introduce him. But I had the joy with this gentleman of we actually happened by happenstance to actually be at the border together because we both went together on this the border, and we got to know each other a little bit. And then he was very gracious. He thought I was smart, so that doesn't mean he's very smart, obviously.
No,
Um,
no.
but what was interesting though is his depth of knowledge on certain subjects blew me away. So I knew at that time that we would definitely have to get him on here and fire it out there. So go ahead, Robert. Bring it to fruition here.
Ian Trottier is with us today, and I don't know how you pronounce his last name in English because I can pronounce it in French, Trottier, but I don't know. I don't know how he says it. Is Trottier in English is the way you would pronounce it? Anyway, I just met him as well. This is brand new for me, and I cannot wait to hear what Ian brings to the table. Ian, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from, and give us some foundation so we can get into these topics today.
Robert, Trottier is just fine, and that goes back to Quebec in 16. I think it's 1636. Jules Trottier landed to help build Quebec from La Rochelle, France. So I believe that makes me 15 generations North America. In 2016, that the Europeans took the land from, if you will. So that was my reaction to that. But yeah, so 14, 15 generations. And I started Discussions of Truth because of the Zika virus and the pesticide, the controversial pesticide being sprayed over the people. It turned out, Robert and Lewis, and by the way, I didn't recognize you, Lewis, but you look like you shaved your beard. It turned out that the pesticide indeed not only had been banned by the European Union because it's a known neurotoxin, and this is what the CDC was feeding the people of Miami with. It turned out that pesticide was causing harm, and I reached out to Lancet and I reached out to the New England Journal of Medicine, and I asked for direct peer-reviewed research that showed was indeed causing the reproductive harm and the microcephaly in the fetus and these neurotoxic effects on in the human being, and nobody can answer. In fact, I got into some type of a Twitter debate with somebody with a Cal Berkeley degree because nobody could show there is no research itself causes direct immunotoxic damage to the anatomy. However, a study out of Oslo linked the pesticide, which is a Rockefeller product by means of Chevron Chemical Corporation. A study out of Oslo, out of Sweden, shows that product itself, and this is why it was banned in Europe, that product itself causes reproductive or neurotoxic damage to the anatomy. So there's a lot into that, but that is why I began Discuss for Truth on Winwood Radio in 2016. The first show was 2017. I credited 2016 because that's when I developed the agreement with the online radio station, now defunct. But from there, I went to a guy at Stanford, and this is where I've been relentless now. Robert and Lewis. I've been relentless now for 7 years in doing the work that I do and the research that I do, because it was like a switch went off on me. The switch went off on me like a switch to defend the Constitution and the nation. We can get into that because we're falling rapidly. It was a guy named Anthony Sutton that had delivered a speech in 1972 in Miami Beach, and he was taking aim at the Federal Reserve Bank and directly the Bush dynasty. This is back in 1972, so neither one of the presidents had been elected, but taking aim at Prescott Bush, and I call it a dynasty because he was funding the Nazi regime through Union Bank. They were funding both sides of the conflict. And what Sutton said out of Stanford, he was a Hoover Institute fellow at the Hoover Institute, and what he was saying is that they were applying financially, they were applying something called the Hegelian dialectic, Frederick Hegel, and that is essentially controlling the outcome, right? Controlling the narrative by controlling both sides. This is how the Rothschild have controlled Napoleon. They fund both sides of conflict. They create order out of creating chaos, which is exactly what's happening in the United States with the divide between Democrats and conservatives. In my research, in my opinion, it's all been engineered, well designed, decades and decades old, and we're seeing it come to fruition. So now, then that begs a question: is Donald Trump controlled opposition, or is he a natural patriot defending his country? And I'm not sure about that. He seems like a great guy, and I certainly support him. But I'm not sold that he might either not be aware or he is aware that he is controlled opposition, because the layers of the deep state influence are incredibly thick. But I want to lay out for viewers and listeners, that is where it all started for me. And I credit it to the work of there's a plethora of other authors that I may source during my time with you. But Anthony Sutton is the guy that where it all started. He's written a number of books lead up to World War I. He talks about, again, the Bush ties, the Nazi Germany. But he's also worked with Chris Mulligan out of Trine Day Publishing, and I have an agreement with Trine Day to publish my books called No More Lies, available on Books A Million. So anyway, so that's the groundwork there. We can go wherever we want, but we might as well go to the border, right, Lewis? We might as well talk about the border a little bit.
We can. It's interesting that virtually every subject that you brought up, we've talked about. So I love that you have that knowledge base here. Something as of late, we mentioned a lot that there's several items inside of the food in the United States that are completely outlawed in Europe. They don't even allow them. I just traveled into another country, and they didn't allow a ton of stuff that the United States allows. So it's very interesting. But let's talk about the border. You did just a wonderful article. In essence, you were saying what's going on the border, we have to pay attention because it's a Trojan horse, or you believe it could be a Trojan horse. But the way you built it to get to that point, I think, was epic. I'm sure people haven't seen that article yet, maybe if they're watching. So if you can detail how you came up with that.
Yeah. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, Lewis, in regards to elements in the food chain. I don't know if it applies or there's elements of the Codex Alimentarius. If your listeners are familiar with that, it's another UN agenda element of the agenda. But from what I understand, but this is no doubt what's happening to the United States is a Trojan horse. I open up that article by quoting supposedly Sun Tzu, right? So Sun Tzu. The Art of War supposedly was written 5 centuries prior to the BC, right, before Christ. However, it's translated in the 1700s by a French Jesuit named Jean-Marie Amiot. And what I argue, very very superficially, right, what I basically state in an argument is that this fellow Jean-Marie Amiot is the author of Sun Tzu, so that it's basically propaganda. It's basically written to propagandize Western culture influence into China, and that Sun Tzu is simply a fictitious character. That's the base argument of what. But the fact here of what I talk about is that the main message behind the Art of War is deception. So here we have in 2024, we've got 46 presidents that represent this banking system, right? The basically what we know as of 1913 with the Federal Reserve. We have essentially a deceptive system. So people refer to, now it's common, what is the deep state, or the deep state's doing this, or how are we connecting to the deep state? I mean, I think it was Donald Trump's administration where that became a common phrase. I don't remember it being used much prior to that. Maybe you do. But it seemed that Donald Trump brought to the forefront the two phrases that stick out of my mind: deep state and also fake news. But the deep state, therefore, is what? So anyway, that's the question, right? Because it's deception. So I go further on in the article, and it's available at yournews.com. It's also on Substack, and it's also on my website, iantrottier.com. But I go on further, and I know a former guest on Discussions of Truth, the name of my podcast. His name is Robert Spalding, the third, I believe it is. And he's a former Air Force Brigadier General. And when he joined the show, Robert Lewis, when he joined the show, he talked about a stealth enemy. Okay, and I kind of quizzed him and got where he was coming from, and he really alluded to the Chinese as being this enemy, this stealth enemy. However, in the article, I argue that they're not so stealth. I mean, they're pretty apparent. They're building their islands. They're wanting to invade Taiwan. They're making no bones about wanting to reclaim. Or at least saying that Taiwan is not independent, and so it's not, and they're buying real estate in the U.S. They're not so deceptive, right? It's not so stealth. They're not being so stealth in my view. They know they can't show up on our shores and deal with our army, but they're not so stealth. So I dig a little bit further, right? And so that's where I go into these. I go into these financial avenues, but to bring back what's happening on a superficial or on a basic level here, I got turned on after we spent that day down on the border. And if people are familiar now with this convoy that's really taking off, because it's on Newsmax, it seems like it's every 15 minutes. It's on Newsmax, at least when I was watching this morning. It was on yesterday. Noelle Roberts was a friend of mine out of Phoenix. She was on Newsmax yesterday. The convoy is really picking up steam. And I think that incepted, Lewis, with the time that we spent with Jonathan Alexander, and meaning we, our mutual friend Kim Yeater, and also Mark Anthony. So we had some really great folks that were in that group with us. There were 7 of us total touring that border that day. And my understanding with dialogue with Mark is that it kind of was a light bulb that went off in his head, and he says, "Okay, let's create this convoy to bring awareness." And even Kim, right? So that was that photo and that logo of the 5 of us. That's you, me, Mark, Phil Lyman, and Jonathan.
You let the cat out of the bag. That was a secret.
What?
No, I'm just playing.
What?
I haven't talked about it yet, but yes. So now that you did, it's interesting. I'm actually a consultant for the border convoy, and I've never mentioned. So I think it's pretty cool that you did. That main picture that they use in the border convoy with the 5 people with their back to the border, standing in front of the hole in the wall. That's actually myself, Ian, Mark, I think Jonathan, and Phil Lyman, correct? Yeah. So very cool. I think that's good information for people to know. Look, Robert's smiling in the background because he didn't even know that.
I didn't know that.
And remember, Lewis, when Kim suggested taking the photo, she kind of said, "Hey, this thing could really take off," and it seems like it might be taking off. I don't know. I know they're using it as the silhouette as a logo, but the idea was to kind of block, to bring a bunch of people down to the border, string them along to roughly 2,000-mile border. It's 19 something, I believe, and kind of and fill the gaps in the Biden gaps, right? Fill those Biden gaps. Here's the main point that I'm trying to make here in regards to what you brought out with the Trojan horse. After our time, I'd introduced, and speaking about convoys, Maureen Steele put together the trucker convoy about a year and a half ago with a guy named Josh Yoder. They'd done that with some consulting, if you will, or some work with the Canadians, because the Canadians had done the first North American convoy. A lot of those guys, I believe, are still in jail. Turned into a mess for them. But Maureen Steele Maureen Steele introduced me to a former special ops. I really don't know what he did in the military. His name is Michael Yon. So, Louis, I'm on the phone with Michael Yon and Robert. I'm on the phone with them for about 2 hours. This is after I'm talking about this border excursion that the 7 of us spent just east of Sassabee that day, where that photo was taken. So I'm talking to Michael Yon, and he's down in Panama. Okay, and Michael says, Ian, he says, this whole migration northward up through Central America and across the border, this has all been orchestrated by an organization called International Organization for Migration, IOM is the acronym, the IOM. They're basing it out of a place called the City of Knowledge. Now, the City of Knowledge is operating as an academic/industrial park out of the former U.S. Army base, Fort Clayton. So they, meaning the UN, because the IOM is a UN agency, took over Fort Clayton as part of the Torrijos and Carter Treaty that goes back to 1977. But what that said was that the Panama Canal would return to Panama and no longer be under its jurisdiction or operation of the United States per se. So in 1999, the turn of the century, it goes back to Panama. And a few years later, 2007, is when the IOM moves in. The City of Knowledge had been created prior to that, but the IOM moves that. And Michael says this is all being orchestrated by the IOM. So then I'm thinking, wait, isn't that basically nothing other than an NGO? And I'm thinking of people like Soros and where these kind of hidden financial strings come into play. I'm really applying to the Trojan horse. I'm applying that to the United Nations. And that is to drive a tactic of collapse. The objective, I see, is to collapse not only society and the economy of the United States by flooding it with now 45 million. There's 45 million illegal immigrants in the United States, if I've got that right. And we have almost 5 million under the Biden administration. It's completely spiked under Biden. We know that. And there's about 130, 140 illegal immigrants coming into this country every month under Biden. So that's why I say this is a Trojan horse orchestrated by the IOM, which is a UN agency. This is essentially a UN tactic to absolve the sovereignty of the United States, to basically collapse it. Economically, we know that with a $34 trillion federal deficit, this government can't fund itself. We know that. They have to continue to borrow. That's a completely separate tactic. It's a war tactic to crash an economy. And they've been doing that for years and years and years and getting these ridiculous wars, whether it be Afghanistan or Vietnam, right? Getting them into mindless wars that don't have the United States in best stature. It's all about playing on the global economic field. So this is where I insert the Trojan horse, because I don't believe the United Nations is an ally of the United States, even though they disguise themselves as an ally, don't they? Because they operate off of land donated by the Rockefeller Foundation in New York, in Manhattan, and that they have their own sovereignty by operating off of that international land. The same way the City of London operates, the same way the Vatican operates, the same way the District of Columbia essentially operates. So that's where I come back to deception. The art of war is deception. And what I argue essentially in my article is that the United States is at war with the United Nations. That is the enemy of the United States. And I can get into some of the reasons why I believe that is the case. But just recently, we learned that there were UN employees attacking Israel as part of Hamas, right? And then today, we see that Biden, under the Biden administration, he has funded that UN tie into Hamas by the tune of $120 million. So I hope that these Freedom Caucus fighters up on the Hill, Matt Gaetz being one of them, I hope they will continue to press this issue and not accept this package that the Biden administration is saying, right? So they're holding back and saying, well, we'll secure the border right off the property of a guy named Jim Chilton. So about 3 months ago, I was approached by Kathleen out of Tucson, and Kathleen says, Ian, I saw what you did in Oregon for the Oregon ranchers. You put together a great event. You brought in 30 speakers from around the country. Can you do that for the Arizona ranchers? So about 3 months ago, I started developing something called the U.S. Border Assembly. And my guy out of Oregon, Curtis Martin, got on the phone and reached out to Mr. Chilton. So Chilton owns a ranch that's about 50,000 acres. So 90% of that is on federal and state land. And what he does is he owns the grazing rights for his cattle. So it's not his, but he does own property that's actually at the border. Kathleen and I went down there with him. What's interesting is that I asked him if he wanted to go look at the No More Deaths camp. Now, keep in mind, it's private land. I don't have permission to go on the private land, but at least I could go to the entrance, kind of look around. He wanted nothing to do with it. There's definitely some nefarious stuff. They disguise themselves. Again, I use the word deception, right? It's almost like an element of espionage. They disguise themselves as a refugee service. But it seems to me that they're certainly working with the cartels, and the cartels are certainly working with the UN and some of these power playing families out of Rome and out of Venice, like the Medicis, right, and like the Orsinis and like the Aldobandinis. These are old families that have actually produced popes that control the Vatican, and they're still vying for power, from my understanding. As a matter of fact, about 25, 30 years ago, an Aldobandini married in. It was actually a Rockefeller married into, or Rothschild that married into an Aldobandini. Anyway, so I think it's important for listeners and viewers to consider a Trojan horse aspect to why their country is in the state that it's in right now, regardless of political, regardless of political affiliation or leniency. The fact of the matter is the Constitution is crumbling, according to John Craig Roberts, who's a former guest on my show, and he's got a degree from Stanford and Oxford, as my understanding. He's a former Reagan advisor. He says the Constitution simply doesn't exist. Well, it's not to a point now where the three of us can't speak openly about these sorts of things and be arrested, as it would be if it didn't exist. So there are elements of it that certainly still do exist, but it's certainly under fire and it's being dismantled as rapidly as it possibly can.
So just a context for people, because we have talked about it a little bit. I don't think this is even my opinion anymore based on my research. The UN is a Luciferian deep state organization. That's what you can go into their halls and their writings and everything, and you can figure that out really, really quick. And the UN, I believe, is mainly controlled by the Rothschilds, the City of London, and the Vatican. That's my opinion. And but they're financed by DC, mainly by DC. So they've infiltrated us, right? And let's add to this Trojan horse theory, because I believe it's a whatever the left hand is doing, you got to pay attention to the right hand. So everybody's focusing on the people crawling across the border, above ground. The reality is there is massive tunnels that are still completely open. I would say that the most nefarious underground, while we're paying attention to what's going on top. What you say about that?
Well, that's entirely possible. And Amy Coelho, I don't know if I've introduced you to her or if you know her, but I'd be happy to make the connection. You guys can bring her on. Amy Coelho is a lawyer out of Dallas, I think it is. And I met her at a Clay Clark event about 8 months ago in Las Vegas. And she blew my mind, because what she was able to do is she was able to go down into, I think it was Nicaragua. Anyway, she got into the MS-13, higher up levels at the MS-13. She was able to crack into it. And what she did is she says, Ian, she says MS-13 and Sinaloa are the same thing. The Sinaloa cartel and MS-13 are the same thing. And then she tied it back to the CIA, which didn't surprise me, and it made complete sense. She says it's all a CIA operative. And but the key issue about what Amy brought to the table, or what she was able to accomplish, is that she exposed and I believe she made arrests, or she got law enforcement make arrests, but she tied an organization called La Luz del Mundo happening. Of course, is an incredibly horrible, disgusting problem brought to light recently in The Sound of Freedom. And of course, what I don't think The Sound of Freedom paid much heed to was connecting the dots from Mexico to Colombia, because certainly that's an organization, and whether it's titled MS-13 or not, but whenever that Border Patrol or former Border Patrol agent, he was acting Border Patrol agent at the time, went into that cocaine farm or drug farm or whatever it was in Colombia, they obviously lacked bringing to sight some of the real critical connections for viewers to understand. They brought the kid in through the Tijuana port of entry, whether that happened or not. And then they also made some connections through the Caribbean. But again, that's Colombia. And Lewis, I firmly and completely agree with you. The United Nations is nothing more than a global agenda by the Vatican organization to control the global economics. And of course, the Bank of International Settlements, which I understand, and I haven't spoken to her about, but I understand she talks about it a lot. Mel Kay out of Florida talks about this a lot. The Bank of International Settlements. Jordan Maxwell, the late Jordan Maxwell, unfortunately. Jordan Maxwell would talk about this frequently. He would talk about how the Bank of International Settlements out of Switzerland, and this is basically a Knights of Malta operation, controls all of the central banking systems globally. That is no doubt. And if you have any listeners, I'm sure you have incredibly intelligent listeners and well-informed listeners, because you yourself, and I haven't heard Robert speak, but I know, Lewis, you're incredibly wise. The Swiss Pontifical Guard, that is the Swiss Army, in other words, is the guard for the Vatican and the Pope. So that's a very kind of surface level connection that people can make to tie the Swiss banking cartel to the Vatican. And I believe, and of course I haven't been able to make the direct connections, you've alluded to them, I would support those angles, but I believe that the United Nations is nothing more than a Vatican agenda. And of course they have used the city of London since before 1066, right? So William the Conqueror was unable to conquer Londinium. He was unable to conquer London. And it used to be visibly public on their website, the charter that he signed to agree to keep the city of London a sovereign entity. And he conquered everything else. But like Washington, D.C. and the Federal Reserve, or being the bank, the New York Fed, which is the primary operation that behind the Federal Reserve, the city of London funds the monarch. A lot of people don't understand that. The monarchy is subservient to the city of London. David Icke's spoken about that, and there's some others as well. And that's really key to understand, because the city of London, formerly known as Londinium, is a Roman banking center. Now, here's something else I want to insert here quickly, Lewis. Woodrow Wilson, the Federal Reserve was passed, signed. The act was signed under Woodrow Wilson. However, at that time, and that set the stage, according to people like Albert Pike, if you read kind of what they wrote in the 1870s. But that set the stage for the mastermind, right? The theaters, right? The theaters, the global theaters, the global war theaters, World War I, World War II. Whether we started, whether it conventionally starts, remains to be seen. But what we do know is that that Federal Reserve was used and passed and used to get the United States involved in that global theatrical effort. But here's a really interesting point that I don't think a lot of people talk about, at least not that I'm hearing. But President Harding, so Wilson himself, it seems, was for the League of Nations. The League of Nations is a precursor to the United Nations.
That's right.
Right? Woodrow Wilson himself likely was for the League of Nations. I don't think he was ever openly opposed to it. However, a large contingency in Congress is what caused the United States to remain out of the League of Nations. Harding, who became president after Wilson, I believe it's worth time to consider that died in San Francisco, which later became the bed to charter the United Nations. This is 1945. But the Rothschild, here's an interesting link here. The Rothschild have controlled the gold trade out of California. We've got the 49ers playing in the Super Bowl this year. You look at the 49ers, which are named for that gold, those gold mining, that gold rush, which California is famous for. There's a book. There's a book. I believe it's listed on my website under I call it a library because I've got a lot of PDFs available for people to go to and source. But the fellow was either educated at Harvard or he was a professor at Harvard. But there's a link to this guy at Harvard, and he wrote a book that directly links the Rothschild to manipulating the gold out of California. So if the Rothschild had been, let's just assume now, the Rothschild had been in California since the 1840s, and they've been controlling its politics. And we know outside of New York, California is the most liberal state. I mean, California politics, in my opinion, are completely socialist. They cater to the global agenda. But if the Rothschild had been in this, and again, socialism is nothing more than it's a government. They're government policies that are meant to centralize control. You centralize power, i.e. the Roman Empire, right? You centralize all that power economically. That's what I believe socialism is. And I can get into some of these other things that might support that argument, including the Paraguayan reduction systems, which were a Jesuit operation in Argentina and Brazil. But anyway, so if the Rothschild controlled politics in California since the 1840s, then in the 1990s, because he was opposed to the League of Nations, he himself was opposed to the League of Nations. So to achieve some of these things, it takes time, right? It takes time to implement, to develop, and then to actually install some of these things globally. And the United States, of course, enemy number one to a global order. The United States and her Constitution ratified in 1789 is enemy number one to the global order because it gives people like you and me and Robert and the rest of us, our viewers and listeners, it gives us the power, right? That's what the Constitution does. If it's upheld, is it gives us the power. It gives us the power to speak freely. It gives us the power to print freely, and it gives us the power to, most importantly, right? In my argument, most importantly, we go back to the Mayflower of 1620. Most important to practice our theological beliefs freely, and that is the key. And so that's what I also argue in the article, is that the Vatican has created a theological monopoly, right? They've created a theological monopoly over 2,000 years. Whether you're Christian or you're not, whether you're Buddhist or whatever you may be, whatever your religion is, you depend, in my opinion, on the Constitution to practice that peacefully and freely. And once you lose that, I believe you would lose it to Rome, because I believe that the Vatican, through the Bank of International Settlements and primarily the Rothschild and how they control those finances out of the city of London and how that ties in to the United States economy. I believe Rome is essentially what is controlling the economics today. And again, let me also insert this. You can insert the British East Indies Company and also the first flag of the United States. There was a flag committee in 1775 that Washington and Franklin adopted what is known as the U.S. Grand Union flag. The U.S. Grand Union flag flew on the John Paul Jones in December of 1775. It was the first official Union battle flag. There are other battle flags there that predate it, but it was the first official Union battle that represented the Union, the coming Union. And that is what represents what was later known as Betsy Ross's Star Spangled Banner with the 13 stars. But of importance here is in that canton is the Union Jack. So the U.S. Grand Union flag has the Union Jack apparently on it. It's there. It's public information on any search engine will yield that result. And the Union Jack represents this cross of St. Andrew, the cross of St. George, and the cross of St. Patrick. That's Scotland, England, and Ireland. If I got the order right. Now that flag is identical to the corporation that funded, primarily from my research, I might be wrong, Washington's army, and that is the British East Indies Company, which operates in a independent, sovereign banking cluster called the City of London. So the British have essentially controlled the U.S. economics under George Washington since day one, is what I argue. So anyway, so I fully support what you're saying there, Lewis, and that the Vatican, if you will, is if not the main player, I believe it is the main player. It is one of the main players in helping identify what is the deep state.
Right. So in fact, and I could add some context to that for the viewers. So we know that for the last few hundred years, Rothschilds have financed both sides of every war. Virtually every war. I pointed out a while ago the same thing about the Swiss Guard with inside the Vatican, and I've been saying this, and people really need to be paying attention to this. All roads lead back to Switzerland. All of them. So if you their largest order of high-level Freemasons are in Switzerland. The banking system, the evil cabal banking system, is in Switzerland. But what have we been taught about Switzerland over the years? We're taught that Swiss have the best chocolate, the best cheese, the best watches, the best air, the best skiing, the best people. I mean, this is what you hear all the time. Now, the people may be wonderful, but what happens is this is the way, let's call it Trump's deep state talk. This is the way the deep state operates. What they do is they put the shiny beacon on the hill, right? DC is the shiny beacon on the hill. The Switzerland is the shiny beacon. So what happens is all roads lead back to Switzerland. We are going to find that. I mean, here's a great antidote to that. Go figure. So I'm glad you brought up Switzerland, because it's and the tie to the Vatican. We know, we have to know by now, Rome never fell.
Yeah, let me mention something. Let me mention something that I've concluded in my time in my studies. Now, I mean, for 7 years, this is all I've done is kind of dissect this stuff and look into people that have written about it and try to understand what the deep state is and how people that listen to my podcast or who I talk to can combat that. And this is an interesting consideration here. So you bring up these various secret societies. So Anthony Sutton is talking about the Skull and Bones Society out of Yale, right? So, and Elihu Yale is a former president, majority shareholder of the British East Indies Company. Elihu Yale and the Skull and Bones operate off of something called the Russell's Trust, which is tied into the Bavarian Illuminati that was created at the University of Ingolstadt by Adam Weishaupt. Interestingly enough, May before July of 1776, if I've got the year right. I think it was the same, like just within a few months of the Declaration of Independence. So the Skull and Bones does not go back to 1776. Skull and Bones was created in the 1840s, I believe. But the Skull and Bones is a seemingly a chapter. It's the primary chapter of the Bavarian Illuminati in the United States. So I'm looking at, okay, what are these if indeed in their building there on Yale campus, which I've never been to, if indeed they are tied to these Masonic rituals, what indeed are they doing? So if we pull back and we look at the there's two things to consider. So we have basically a Caesarean approach to rule of the Roman Empire, and then we saw a shift to a papal, right? So it was basically, okay, Caesar, I take my army and I can beat yours and I will control your land. Well, that went on for a few centuries, I suspect. I don't know how that, but that went on for a while. But then there was a more brilliant approach to conquest, and that was conquering the minds, right? Firing the minds of man, right? Conquering the mind of man. And if I can conquer the mind, and if I can finance, I take my spoils and I can finance. We're getting back to the Rothschild here. I take my spoils and I can fund your army and let your army, i.e., Spain, Portugal, France, all of the European nations that conquered the Americas or the New World, right? They're all basically doing it under the theological motive of the Vatican. Okay, now you can argue that the Church of England never, because the City of London never got its sovereignty, therefore the Church of England never became really financially separate from its role, its Roman ruler. So if we take that viewpoint, it's very important to consider the difference between a Caesar type rule of Rome and Rome's army to this papal type rule of Rome and Rome's army, whereas the papal role again uses someone else's army to do the dirty work. It's absolutely brilliant, really. But I come back and I step back and I go to the calendar, and this is where this sinks into the secret society and what they operate and practice and these rituals that they do. Look. The Gregorian calendar is different from the Julian calendar by a minuscule. I mean, basically, it's the difference between the leap year, right? I mean, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's the way I understand it. The difference is very minuscule, right? But it's minuscule enough to where it makes a huge difference on a global scale. And how a government, which is basically what the theology is, it's a form of control and governance, can operate. But this is important because we operate today in 2024 off of the Gregorian calendar. It's a Gregorian calendar. Now, this is where it comes back to organizations like the Skull and Bones, or they're also known as lodges. And I'm not taking shots at, there's plenty of people that are good people and various, whatever it may be. I'm not saying every pope's a bad person. I'm not saying it, but I'm saying there is a apparatus that was constructed and there are power struggles in that apparatus, but it's that apparatus that controls the minds of men globally. And that's what I call the deep state. I'm clearly saying it's the apparatus that was created out of what is today the Vatican. But these people, this system is so sophisticated and it's so well tuned and so well oiled that they literally, it seems, Lewis and Robert, they literally practice what is called a circumnavigation. This is public knowledge. And they circumnavigate in such a way that mimics the function of the solar system. Why is that important? Because the calendar that we live our lives, i.e. the holidays that we live our lives, mimic the function of the solar system. Right. So, again, I'm not taking shots at anybody's, and I'm not taking a shot at anybody's religious beliefs. I'm simply not. As a human being, no, we don't have any answers, and we know very little, right? The more we know, the more we realize we don't know. But what I will say, for instance, is we celebrate at the end of the year, the Gregorian year, we celebrate something called Christmas, right? It's a mass. It's Christ's mass based on. The reason I like to talk about this a lot, Lewis and Robert, is because I was a big fan of Jordan Maxwell. It's just I felt he thought out the box. He was thinking out of the box, and I think that's what that's part of the beauty of freedom of speech is verbalizing what you think up here, and you must think freely to have a healthy functioning society. Now, with this with the Christ Mass, is the Christ Mass simply doing nothing more than celebrating the winter solstice, right? So that's just a different way of looking at how some of these secret societies, because we know they exist, is that really what the practice, right? Not getting into much to ancient Egypt or even Greece or Babylon, because I really don't know a whole lot about those topics. But is that really what the what is passed on from generation to generation to generation? Is simply a mimic of this form of government, because at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, we are all subservient to the system, right? I mean, the universe centers around the sun, and our food grows in regards to the function of the system, right? And our lives basically are a reflection of that system as well. So anyway, so I just wanted to insert that for viewers and listeners to consider. And that's without getting into technocracy and without getting into transhumanism, right? Because we've got all these advances in technology to consider as well. But without getting into that, this is simply a consideration for people to perhaps understand more what could be if you want to limit the definition of the matrix as being, right? So we're all basically living in someone else's system, and we didn't create it.
Right. True. We talk a lot here about the Gregorian Julian calendar. So I would contend that the manipulation was a lot more than one day. So I'll give you an example here. The word September was derived from the word sept in Latin. Sept is 7, but September is 9 to our knowledge. October is octingenti to be exact in Latin, which is 8, yet they tell us it's 10. November is novem, which is 9, and everybody knows December Deca is, I'm sorry, November is 9 and December Deca is 10. So they clearly shifted them by 2 months. And a little bit proof about this is after Pope Gregory, and that's why the Gregorian calendar is named, after he did this, they were teasing people that were still celebrating New Year's around April 1st. And that's where the term April Fools came from, because they would call them April Fools, which is very interesting. So I contend that we should be on, because this is order out of chaos. This is what you talked about before. I contend that we should be on a 13-month calendar, because that would be 28 days a month, 13 months, and then you'd have 1 day of renewal. That would be the 365th day, and that almost would be a date off the calendar. It's a separate date altogether. Why do I say that? Because then it's very simple. You have your Sunday through Saturday, right? Or it may change from Monday through Sunday, by the way. That could be a manipulation also. It would be on the same day, every single boom, 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 every week, every month. Be very easy, right? And then we can get into. So I'm putting together my next film is called Breaking Babylon, which will go into details about this really weird dynamic of switching our words around and switching the calendar around, and all this manipulation is to keep us off balance. Because if we were resonating the way we should, why would you celebrate New Year's in the dead of winter? You would never, ever do it. And if you want to tie it to the Bible, it says when Christ was born that the shepherds were moving their flocks. Well, they only moved their flocks in spring and so that tells you right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
The rebirth.
Go figure, right? So my audience is very receptive to what you're saying, because we've seeded this a lot. So I'm glad you brought this stuff up for sure.
So another thing I want to mention, Lewis and Robert, and Robert, you're still there, right?
I'm still here. Yes. just trying to keep up with you, my friend. You are just blasting us today. Awesome.
That's nice, man. That's cool. I appreciate it. Look, the other thing I wanted to mention, Like I said, dude, when I was sprayed in Miami with that pesticide, and it smelled like burning flesh. Seriously, it smelled like burning flesh. And then I realized the Rockefeller were involved in the pesticide, and then I got on the Anthony Sutton, and I saw the Rockefeller. And I think a lot of this stuff's been scrubbed off the internet. The Rockefeller were involved in not only the Zika virus, because they funded the scientists in the Uganda forest in the 1940s. There's also a whole other element of the advances in technology and then its manipulation, right? I mean, basically, we know that. But that's, again, it's this whole integration of advances in technology over, and that ability to manipulate the human being and the anatomy and how that human being functions. But what I wanted to mention was I wanted to go back to Adam Weishaupt, and I wanted to tie in, and I addressed this in the article. I wanted to tie in St. Ignatius de Loyola. So there's a guy named Eric John Phelps, and Eric John Phelps is a theological historian that I think he teaches at some college. He's a former guest of mine, and he talks extensively about the Jesuit order. And as I'm doing my podcast starting in 2016 and doing my research starting in 2016, for a first few years, I'm thinking to myself, where is this manipulation? Where is this global manipulation? Where's this agenda coming from? Now, it dawned on me, independent of Eric John Phelps, that okay, this is simply an extension of what's been happening in the Middle East for millennia, right? This is a holy war, and wait, I mean, it's a no-brainer. We knew this from first grade. The Mayflower sailed in the Atlantic in search of religious freedoms, right? So anyway, so that's where I at. But then Eric John Phelps starts talking about Counter-Reformation, Martin Luther, and all this stuff. And I try not to get too much into religion because people have their belief system. It's up to them. But I do look at facts.
Hey, Ian, it is absolutely fine, because I've gone into detail. I actually created a movie on how the Jesuits were founded. So this is the perfect audience for
Sweet.
that. So go for it.
So what Eric John Phelps starts talking about is Loyola, right?
Saint Ignatius of Loyola.
Yeah, and what he says now. I'm not getting into like any of the esoteric, undescribable, unproven types of things that happen on the planet. But what he says is that Loyola he can't confirm, but he says that he's either a member of, or he's at least mentored by the Spanish Alumbrados. And the Spanish Alumbrados, of course, is 1540, right? This paves way to the passing. I think it was under St. Paul. This paves way to the passing of papal bull, which I write about, and I like my readers and listeners to understand what is a papal bull, because basically, if you give this apparatus, this Roman theological apparatus, if you give them the power to determine and define existence and reality for you, then that means you give them the authorization to speak for you, because you believe that they represent God, whatever God is for you. So that's what a papal bull is. A papal bull is basically law, the Pope's law, because God says so. Now, the Spanish Alumbrados paved way to Ignatius de Loyola's Society of Jesuits, or Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits. This is 1540. And that operates off of a papal bull named Regimini Militante Ecclesiae, something like that. It's that Latin phrase. And that is, and I'll tie that into Georgetown University, that is exactly the operation that the Jesuit institution known as Georgetown University operates off of. And in fact, the Great Seal with the eagle that represents the government of the United States, not a constitution, but the government, is the same seal as Georgetown University. That's a feeder, of course, into DC politics. Well, the connection I'm making here is the Spanish Alumbrados. So again, not talking about esoteric things, but that is defined as the Illuminati. So therefore, we're taking the connection into American politics, present day. Right? We're taking Spanish Alumbrados, the Jesuit Saint Ignatius de Loyola Illuminati. We're tying that to Adam Weishaupt and his influence into the Yale University through the Russell Trust. But we also know there's a connection through George Washington and the British East Indies Company. Now, something else I want to mention here is this, and I want to make it clear that a lot of this information comes from this guy Eric John Phelps. It's very important that listeners and viewers understand where my sources are from. But if you look at the name, the White House, right? We're told that the White House is painted white in defiance of the British burning it, right? So kind of like we dare you to set a fire again. Well, here's something else to consider, is that the co-founder of the colony of Maryland, which represents Mary, right? The Virgin Mary, or named after it, rather, that type of representation. Maryland is co-founded by a Jesuit father named Andrew White. So therefore, what Phelps argues is that the White House is named for the land that's donated by what was the precursor of the founder of the land, Andrew White. So does the White House represent the color white? I suspect it likely represents Andrew White. And that goes back to also the ranch land and farmland that I think the guy was named Pope or something like that. I mean, there's so many different ties, and your listeners and viewers probably are well educated on this, but there's so many different ties to DC and how it operates back to the Jesuits, which, by the way, are a military order, and it is their objective to invade and conquer, and they don't do it with weapons. Again, that's what I'm talking about. It's really brilliant. I mean, this is brilliant. This is by far, regardless of how long the human species has been occupying the planet, this is by far the most successful military operation ever devised by man, is what I argue. And they do it by conquering the mind of man. But the Jesuits are Skull and Bones, because Anthony Sutton called his house because he was investigating the membership of the Skull and Bones. But interestingly enough, Charlotte Eisenbet, who's passed away about a year and a half ago or so, Charlotte was fired by the Reagan administration because she was opposed to what the Department of Education was doing and the where they were going. This was back in the 80s, and she wrote a book in the early 90s, I think it was, called Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. So the Jesuits, therefore, have controlled and been dumbing down Americans for a long time.
Yeah, agreed. In fact, interesting enough, the first actions of the Jesuits were more of a physical military with swords actions, and then they did exactly what you said, and then it's about the infiltration of the mind. So what happened is, for people that don't know this, the Protestants were openly against the behavior of the Roman Catholic Church. Not the church itself, but the behavior, because they constantly put the church and the Pope in front of God when they would speak. So those were the idols were the church and the Pope. So what happened is the Protestants used to do something that sounds like it's crazy. Back in the 1500s, they literally hand wrote a bunch of signs calling out the church and saying, "Can you please put God first?" and posted them all over the place. So Ignatius of Loyola recruited his 6 top students to go take care of business. And then they did, which ended up founding the Jesuit Society of Jesus, which is the Jesuits. And therefore now they are literally the military arm of the Vatican Church. It's just It's wacky. I'm so glad you're bringing this to their attention because it's an amazing, deep conversation. Hey, Robert, jump in. Do you have any questions? I know we're running a little late on time. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm just spinning my wheels, just trying to keep up. I just posted in the chat one of the subjects I have the hardest time with is anything historical. I don't know, doesn't compute. I'm just like present day and future rather than back for some reason.
Yeah. Well,
Is
the reason why the history of this is so important
it
is
is
that
important,
brings us
yeah.
to what is going on
Yep.
today. And Ian did a brilliant job of tying it all right back in. This construct has been going, I would say, pretty much at the founding of the Khazarian Mafia. But I mean, that's how far I would go back in this, and then that's the Rothschilds and so on and so on. And you
Yeah.
want to drop any? I know you're going to drop one before we close out here.
Well, look, I mean, there's something out there. There's two other things. There's two other things I want to quickly address for listeners. One is the fact, and I haven't looked at too much of the Khazarian, but you're looking at what basically, from my understanding, was the split of the Holy Roman Empire from East and West. And I think this has a lot of roots. I don't know for sure, but I think this has a lot of roots to the power structure of Europe as Rome lost its stronghold and as the different countries started developing, like France and Germany and England, and these different kind of sovereign populations began getting their own identities. I want to trace it back to about 350, I think it was, AD, to use their calendar, Constantine. And I had a fortune of going to York, England a few years ago, and I hadn't known this history, but in York, England, otherwise formerly known as the Roman trading center Eboracum, it was in Eboracum, again, renamed York, but it was in Eboracum, and yes, think Empire State, New York, but it was in Eboracum that Constantine, this is in England, present-day England, where Constantine was crowned emperor of Rome. And he knew enough to know that he was going to move the Roman Empire headquarters, if you will, from Rome to Istanbul. So, and I haven't looked too much into the Khazarian Mafia, so can't speak to that. But it has something to do with this power struggle from east to west. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was this. That should be enough fuel for anybody to be interested in that, to look down the Constantine influence, but because it ties back to England is what I'm saying, and we're speaking their language, right? So, but the other thing is the Darien Gap. So we're gonna go back to the Trojan horse, and I'm not going to directly tie Trojan horse to the Darien Gap, but there's something of importance here to consider when looking at the International Organization for Migration, because I think with this convoy and the success that Mark and Kim have had to really blow that up and draw exposure to that, I think, and from my angle, and I've written this article, sounds like you've looked at it, I wrote that article, and what I do is I point fingers at the UN, right? And we're seeing the UN fund. I mean, the U.S. gave $12 billion to the UN a couple of years ago, I think it was. It's deception, right? And like you said, Lewis, they're using the economic success of the United States to fund the enemy of the United States. So basically, we're funding our demise, right? So immediately out of the UN right now, and abolish the Federal Reserve immediately. I would do both of those things if I had any type of power. And I tell any politician I can speak to, whether it's Sonny Borelli in Arizona, or it's Matt Gaetz, whoever I speak to, I tell them abolish the Federal Reserve. And Anthony Sabatini, who is a former acting politician out of Florida, totally agrees with me. Sonny Borelli totally agrees with me. So you want to save the republic, because it's not a democracy. You want to save the republic. That's where you start. Is you abolish the Federal Reserve. But the Darien Gap, and thanks for your time. The Darien Gap is of importance to consider here, because what's happening is to create, you set the stage for these different theaters. And that means centralizing power, right? And so you clump North America into one kind of entity. You create one. I believe that's the objective. Is you create one kind of currency for North America. So Mexico, let's just say Mexico, U.S., and Canada. You mix the cultures. You create one currency. Let's just say that's what's going to be happening in the next 10, 20 years. I don't know, but that's the objective. But you also have something to consider here called the Pan American Highway. And that's connecting northern territories down to and I won't get into the shape of the Earth, whether it's flat or I won't get into that. But the Pan American Highway, there's something called the Darien Gap, and the Darien Gap, just south of the Isthmus of Panama, where the canal is something that we're told that a highway cannot be constructed, and this goes back to Carlos V. Carlos V. I mean, you're looking at a few centuries of people trying to create a canal, and were unable to until Teddy Roosevelt was financed by likely the deep state or the city of London, basically. Anyway, so the Darien Gap is something to consider when people are researching that angle and how the IOM is orchestrating this, per Michael Yon, is orchestrating this immigration and the destruction of our border. Consider the Darien Gap and how that might possibly, because he's addressed it with me. In fact, he said Mayorkas has gone down to the Darien Gap to look at what's going on down there. And we know Kamala Harris went to Guatemala 2 years before she ever gone to Texas to look at the border. And I think she spent 5 minutes at the Texas border. So there's an entire globalist structure and system that people need to start investigating. I would exhort them to start investigating and looking into to try to dissect this web.
That's beautiful. I just need to. Robert has something to say, and then I want to. There's some questions in the chat, but I want to address one because you said one of my favorite things. We're in a republic, not a democracy. So that they said exactly. Public figures are repeating democracy endlessly. Would love to know the significance. Why no one says republic? Well, I can tell you the reason why. It's what happens is if you can convince the people of America, United States, I should say, that we are in a democracy, then you have instant totalitarianism. And they don't understand how democracy can turn into that. Because what happens is when you have a democracy and you give one person all the authority, and it doesn't go through our checks and balances and our republic, that literally creates an autocrat, and he can do anything he wants, anytime he wants, anyhow, and you have to wait. If you're lucky to have a real election, you'd have to wait 4 years to get him out of there anyways. So this is why they want to tell you it's a democracy, because they want to position the president as the guy. Well, if you look at what the founding fathers created, the last person that was the guy was the president. The president would only come in during a war or a State of the Union address, and that's the only time you should have ever seen or heard from the president. But they've created this, I believe, an MK Ultra propaganda that the president is the guy. So to answer your question is, why would they want a democracy, or why would they push this? So they can make the president the guy. And therefore, they're in complete control because they only have one person that needs to puppet the narrative. So I love when you say the word republic, because that's what it's all about. Robert, you had something to say, I believe.
I am trying really, really hard not to look like I was born in 1776. I tell you. A little bit of spray over here, make you look a little younger. I think it's doing a good thing. Oh, boy. Well, look at Lewis. Lewis looks so much better. So many comments in the chat room about the clean-shaven and brighter skin Lewis has. Well, you want to know his secret is not makeup. I know his wife's involved in that world, but no, it's not makeup. It's Neumi skin. It's really helpful. This is a glutathione product, a nanoparticleized glutathione product that helps you look better, tightens the pores, helps with wrinkles. And the interesting thing that it does that I think a lot of women really love is it brightens the skin. Look at this lady here. Look at her from January through August, and she uses the spray and the swish twice a day. She's 65. Look at her on the right. Almost can't tell that it's the same woman. Unreal. Absolutely love this product. Lewis and I are big fans, and we don't bring anything here that we don't believe in, obviously. And here's the Swish product. This is the one that goes internally. A couple of capfuls of this in your mouth, swish it around for a few minutes. The glutathione goes right into your blood system, goes right to the liver, where it'll help you deal with oxidative stress, help you detox, help you recover faster after physical exertion, help you sleep better. And I do it before the shows because why? It gives me a little bit more energy. Like a little bit of pep when I do these shows. You know, it takes a lot of energy out of us to be on for this amount of time. But it helps a lot. This is a great, great, great product. If you want to find out more, I'm going to tell you, go to renegademedia.tv/energy, renegademedia.tv/energy, or you can scan the QR code that is on your screen now. We love this product, and Lewis and I get pitched a lot of products, and very few of them that we say yes to. This is one of them.
Yeah, we well over 100, and we've only opted to talk about 3.
Yep.
And it's not because of the competency of the product. Somebody did True Kells did ask, did the Herms come back in stock?
It has.
And the answer is, I was just told yes, they sold out. And now that's back in. And just real quick, folks, the Herms is for women. It does amazing, amazing, amazing work. Hey,
you see, my bottle is not opened. Just to give you a clue.
Although I do call it Herms for him because the guys are very happy.
Yep.
Ian, where can everybody find you? I think your information is epic. I'm sure they're going to want to they're going to want to have that, and we will also post it in the links below. But if you can let them know, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So please go to iantrottier.com. That's IANTROTTIER.com. There you can find articles that I've written and go into the research library. You might find some stuff. It's all free PDFs that I've collected over the years. You can access that. If you want one of my hats, you can order one of my hats. I've got shirts, but order one of the books. It's called Freedom Reserve, No More Lies. Trine Day Publishing. And Trine Day's published some great authors, including Paul Hellyer, passed away, Daniel Estelin, the Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son. I don't know if he still does his show or not. But that's where people can find me. I post a bunch of stuff to Instagram for fun. And then again, like I said, Your News is run by Sam Anthony out of Florida. And he has a good business model. I publish through him and also Substack. Lewis, I wanted to ask you, because you're talking about your next documentary. Are you familiar with the work of Brooks Agnew?
The name, not the work. No, so I'm going to write that down right now.
I'd be happy to make an introduction. Brooks is what I'd consider a friend of mine, and he does some really good stuff. So I'll make an introduction. I'm sure he'd be happy to join your program.
Oh, beautiful. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right, Robert, that about does it. You want to sign us out here?
Do I really? I like being here so much. You know, I could stay here all day and just hang out with all our buds. I really appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you so much for supporting us, and make sure you are following this channel that you're watching on, whichever channel it is you're watching on. We stream on multiple channels now, and we'll be adding more coming forward. We'll be adding more channels that we'll be streaming on as well, and we're really looking forward to reaching a wider audience with what we do. The comments, the feedback is really important. So if you want to reach out to us, Robert at renegademedia.tv, let us know how we can improve, how we can serve you better, because that's what we're here to do. And Lewis and I are always listening. You know, we pay attention. We watch what goes on in the chat room. And your comments are real important to us in terms of helping us mold this show and do the best we can for all of you. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Ian. Awesome job. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Awesome. One more word, Lewis, or are you done for the day?
I am wordless.
Oh, you are wordless. All right. Thank you, everyone. Love you all.